All right, second time is the charm after some technical difficulties. Listeners, I'm really happy to have Vance Crowe on the podcast. If you did not listen to our first episode on Vance's podcast, we will have a link to it in the show notes. I encourage you to listen to it because we'll pick it up from there. And as I joked the first time we started recording, it's a pleasure to have you in the hot seat this time, Vance. I don't have to feel like I'm in the hot seat myself this time, all so much. So.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Yeah, it's fun to flip flop on podcasts and get to be the one answering questions versus asking questions.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll make it a bit more of a conversation. But I was actually thinking about you just the other day because I've been doing a bunch of ag events. I think my ag events are just about done here for this quarter. The winter time is a good time for ag guys to have events. And you and I are both speaking, not exclusively, but it's been a lot of, at least for me, a lot of ag recently. And I know it's been a lot of agriculture for you too. And these are perilous times for farmers. And one of the interesting things about the position that you and I are in is we're not necessarily farmers ourselves. That's not our day to day. We have, background in that, but we're rubbing shoulders with folks who are in that full time. And everything from tariffs to, is there going to be a farm bill? There's all sorts of things that are happening around them. I also, I don't know how much to believe this, but there was an AgWeb poll that came out just a couple of days ago that said 54% of farmers disagree with Donald Trump's use of tariffs, and that a bunch more didn't think that they were going to get any compensation at all from the USDA. Like just one little data point. I'm not sure that actually corresponds with what I've been hearing. But tell me what your sort of conclusions are with how farmers are reacting to what's happening in U.S. politics, whether it's tariffs or RFK Jr. and Maha. Take it any direction you want.
Yeah, I think so. I've had a chance to travel around a big part of U.S. ag and then finished up my speaking season in the ag world up in Ontario. And there couldn't be a more stark difference between those two perspectives. When I'm down in places like Mississippi and Arkansas, even though tariffs are there, even though farmers are watching depressed commodity prices and increased input costs, they're still very pro-Trump. I mean, you can hear them cheering for it even as it's hitting their own pocketbook. One of the big things that happened while I was down in the South was that Doge started cutting out a bunch of the sustainability programs. And this was literally hitting people in their pocketbooks because you'd had farmers that had signed up for a program. They had put the money down for fences, for pattern tile, for different kinds of erosion control. And then when they went to go get the check for the government's half, which the government had agreed to, they were like, actually, no, this program's been canceled and sorry, there's no money for you. And so you had farmers that had actually experienced this, and yet they're still sitting there being like, I wouldn't have it any other way. On the other hand, you go up to Canada, and these are a bunch of farmers that know what it's like to be knuckled under by a liberal government. They are very pro-conservative government, but Trump is a bad word. There's boos and hisses when you have it up there in Ontario. And so you couldn't have a more stark differentiation between those two countries.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast just recently when you had a Canadian farmer on in general, and he seemed actually more lukewarm on it. And I have heard, at least from some Canadian farmers, that maybe the pressure that Trump is putting on Canada will force Canada to deal with some of its own inefficiencies in its food system. But the flip side of that is, I mean, at first Trump's move to pressure Canada seemed like it was working really well. Like he got Trudeau to exit stage left and got an election to be called. But now, if you're looking at the polls, like Carney's neck and neck with the conservatives, and like every single time Trump threatens that Canada is going to become a 51st state, it almost feels like he's shooting himself in the foot there. So I sort of expect that that's going to continue. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think there is a radical difference in agriculture between Western Canada and Eastern Canada. And this is something I wasn't ready for. But after I had given my speech in Ontario, I'm at the Ontario Grain Farmers. I'm sitting at the table where there are dignitaries and other people. We're eating dinner, and I bring up the what I called the trucker rally. I think it was kind of in the discussion. And a man across the table from me said it wasn't a rally, it was an insurrection. And other people around them were saying yes. And so when you go out west, they don't view it that way at all, right? They view the trucker convoy as a big part of ag. They view it as a big part of standing up to the centralized government. But you get out east, and these farmers are saying, hey, they're not aligned in the same way that if you went from Montana to Mississippi, you would find uniform agreement across there. But in Canada, I think the western provinces are still very strong in favor of Pierre Poilievre. And the East is saying, I don't know, we kind of like our supply management. We like the fact that we have, a certain amount of milk that's going to be bought, a certain amount of eggs, and we can't have that much competition. So Canada is a lot more different from the United States than I expected because the farmers are not uniform in their opinions.
Yeah. Do you feel like there are similar geographic divisions inside of the United States that are that stark?
Not really. My sense is when you go from high density to low density, the more low density you go, the more conservative it is in the United States, and that may actually play out exactly in Canada, right? The most of the Ontario farmers that are really making money are sitting well below the northern shield, and they're in kind of high
Mhm.
population areas. So maybe that's probably the closer analogy. It's not east to west; it's density versus high density versus low density.
Yeah. What is your own well, and you have a communications background too. You could tell the listeners a little bit about what, your background and how that looks into it. If you were advising the Trump administration or Brooke Rollins or somebody about tariffs, how would you tell them to communicate about it better? Because I would venture that they are not communicating particularly well about what their strategy is. That might be because they don't have a strategy. It might be because they're playing fourth dimensional chess and like none of us can see the strategy. But I wonder from your point of view, like how would you help them if they were trying to communicate what they're trying to do a little bit better?
Yeah, I a few months ago would have bought into the 4D chess argument, and now having watched it, I do not believe they're playing 4D chess. Brooke Rollins, I think, is an exceptional loyalist, and she definitely has tapped into a certain part of agriculture. But in order to get the farmers behind you, and is I believe to do some things that farmers have been banging on for a long time. There's a thing called M-Cool, where it's really about origin of beef labeling. Now, in the
Mm,
United States, the funny thing about the checkoff program, so this is where if you go to sell a cow for every 100 pounds, you have to put $1 or so into the pot that goes to their marketing and branding program. In the United States, it's not in the checkoff program. It is not just the cattlemen. It is also the packing organizations. So the companies that kill and slaughter and butcher the cows, now they have very different interests than the farmers. So they don't actually want origin of product labeling because they want to be able to import beef from
mhm,
Canada or Mexico or whatever that is and say, hey, this is USDA inspected beef. You can expect that it's from America. Well, the farmers, on the other hand, or the ranchers, are saying, hey, we want ours because we know Americans will pay more for American beef than they would if they knew that this was coming from Mexico or these cuts were coming from somewhere down in Brazil. And
mhm.
I think that there are a lot of farmers that are becoming quickly disillusioned by the Trump administration because they're not going for the little man. They are continuing to do large scale agriculture. The USDA just rolled out their payments of $10 billion. This is going to be
Yep.
more of the same. And I think that it's really catering to the large scale organizations. But I think ag in general in the US is moving away from a lot of that messaging that I think worked in the teens, which is when I was really heavily involved in agriculture. I was the director of millennial engagement for Monsanto, which meant there were people that had strong feelings about GMOs and pesticides. My job was to go talk with them. And this is how I learned a lot about the US agriculture system and kind of understanding what farmer perspectives were, particularly relative to, urban consumers.
Yeah, those payments that you're talking about, it's one of those things where, those were approved under the Biden administration. It was funny how the Trump administration was basically trying to take credit for it. Like if you were a novice just looking at the headlines, you would have been like, "Oh, Trump is like saving the farmers here." Where it's like, "No, he's just continuing the same things that Biden is continuing, except he's also doing it with tariffs." And he's also doing it with, in his State of the Union, he said that farmers should sell more to the domestic market, the local market, which I've been preaching that for years. I've been telling farmers to prepare for that because that's the way that politics was headed. I didn't expect to hear that from a sitting president, like in the mid 2020s. Like I was thinking maybe you had till 2030 to lobby your congressman and get some infrastructure built and do some things around that. Are you sort of surprised at the pace to which that's gone? Is that one of those things where Trump is off in la la land saying one thing and all the loyalists are doing something else and they're just kind of perpetuating a system? Like how are you navigating the differences in those policies? Because they don't seem to fit together to me.
Yeah, you are exactly right that they're trying to take credit right now from the for the money that Biden put together for him. That $10 billion was already allocated, and now they're trying to claim this is going to help you through all the challenges of the beef checkoff. or not the beef check. I'm sorry, delete that.
Hmm.
They're claiming is that this is going to be a way to protect you against all the damage that tariffs are going to have. I don't think that's true. They're also, one thing I'll say is they are pushing away from like the renewable fuel standard, including something like the sustainable aviation fuel. I think there are a lot of farmers on one side saying, "Hey, you got to do this. We need to create, you know, uh, artificial demand in order to be able to keep our farmers going." And they haven't made any claims one way or another on this. And I think that kind of confusion is making it so farmers are feeling very um, left in the dark about what's going to happen. There's a lot of well, we don't know what's going to happen. We trust our guy, but we're not so sure what's going to happen.
I'm so glad you said that. You know, I was one of the events I did this winter was the North Dakota Corn and Soybean Expo, and I've been somebody who's been fairly bearish on biofuels for the last couple of years, just because it felt too popular. But like everybody was talking about it, everybody was planting more beans or thinking that renewable diesel was going to be the thing that took off, and I felt like it had come down enough to where I was actually interested in it. And one of the reasons I was beginning to turn a little more optimistic was, of all the things the Trump administration is using tariffs on, this is the one. Like the quote unquote used cooking oil that's coming in from China, or the canola that's coming across from Canada, or some of these other things that really are flooding the US market and is even preventing the US corn or soybean or canola farmer from getting what they should be getting as part of at least the very small move towards biofuels and the overall energy complex. And yet they're not doing that one. Like that's the one I think that would have in some ways the greatest potential impact. And I'm not quite sure why, because if what you want is lower energy prices and you want to export more oil and more natural gas, and you want to support your base and these farmers who believe in you so passionately, it feels like a layup. Like just tariff China on used cooking oil and Canada on canola. And you don't even have to do anything with the standards, just like prevent that market from being manipulated by some of that dumping. And they're not even going there quite yet. And I don't really know why. So I don't know. How are you feeling about the biofuels conversation? Because I think farmers
Well,
should be
that's a
really
great point.
concerned if Elon is still around and the Department of Government Efficiency like learns about all these ethanol subsidies. Like it'd be very scary.
I think you've got a great point there, and this actually not part of the discussion right now. People are not talking about, hey, let's kick out China. Let's just make it so it's really expensive for California to get carbon credits by importing China's cheap um, cooking oil. It's just not a part of the discussion. I do like maybe the 4D chess part. If I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, is that they are really focused on trying to cut out as much as they can of the USDA the farm bill, right? And that
Mhm.
they're hammering hard that 80% of this is for SNAP benefits, and people are able to buy soda and Pop Tarts and things like this on it, and how unfair this is. And I don't know what they're going to get from this. It seems to me that is probably as politically rife or difficult to get any sort of real accomplishment on as trying to cut down the Pentagon budget. I mean, there's just so many people that are making money on this that you are going to alienate huge swaths of people. But it does appear to me that most of their energy right now is on that part of it. But I mean, cleaning up the USDA and making that a lean, mean organization is incredibly difficult, probably just as difficult as cleaning up the Pentagon.
But probably more so than cleaning up the Pentagon, I would argue. Um, do you have any hope for the small American farmer? Like, do you think that the small American farmer can compete in this world? Because it feels like every single administration or every single year, like we think it's going to get better, and it's just not going that way. And farm size continues to increase, and like the small mom and pop farmer continue to sort of feel pressure. And that's one thing I've really noticed in the past couple of months. Just that the big guys seem, yeah, they're interested in tariffs. They want to talk to you about politics. But for the people who this is their life, it's been their life for generations. They want to pass it on to future generations. It just looks like a really grim prospect to do it. And if you are doing, you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices. Do you have any silver linings there? Because I'm not normally one who feels pessimistic or doom and gloom, but I have to admit the doom and gloom is even getting to me a little bit. It's hard to resist it.
Yeah, I think the small American farmer only survives if he becomes incredibly comfortable with debt. And what I do in most of my time when I'm not actually going out and speaking is I record people telling their life stories. And so a lot of times people will say, "Hey, mom and dad are getting older. I want to make sure we preserve their stories for their grandkids. So I want you to talk with them about their lives. And one of the questions that I know is going to bring a powerful wisdom section is when I say, how should your children understand debt? And I have never once heard a person say that you can farm without it. And that's because land prices keep going up way beyond their utility value. You are, if you buy land, you are not planning to be able to make money on that land. What you're trying to do is to preserve the value of the dollars that you spent on it. And so what I think is keeping that going is outside of inflation, and you kind of already know my strong feelings about we've got to do something to control inflation. But outside of that, there are two major things that are going to keep land prices going up and are going to force farmers to get big or get out, which is the renewable fuel standard, where you mandate that within your state, 15% of your gasoline has to have ethanol in it. That is making it so there is constant supply. There's constant demand that's going to soak up whatever supply you can put. And then farm subsidized insurance, where you can get an
Mm.
insurance policy where 60 to 80% of it is covered by the government. And what ends up happening is farmers know that they have a 5-year look back. So they have to have 5 years of however many bushels you can get off of this farm when you farm corn or soybeans, let's say 170 or 200 bushels. If you deviate in any way from that, then you're lowering the amount that you're going to get your land insured for, which is actually going to bring down its value if you ever go to sell it. And so these
Hmm.
two things, the fact that you have unlimited supply is not dictated by demand, because demand is artificial, and the fact that people don't want to take risk because taking risks makes their insurance vulnerable, is going to make it so unless those two policies are changed, the small American farmer has virtually no chance, and it is get big or get out.
Any chance those get changed during the Trump administration, in your opinion?
I don't think it doesn't appear to me that Doge is actually going to cut those things. I think there's some libertarian minded people that are hopeful and excited about it, but no, I don't think so. I think when they picked Brooke Rollins as the Secretary of Ag, that was the signal that we may change some things around the edges, but we're not making substantive changes.
What about RFK Jr.? Does he play into this at all, or is he sort of more of a carnival show on the side?
I think not a carnival show. I think that this is a part of the larger Trump system that ag has not fully understood what is potential going on there. As head of the FDA, he's not really able to make substantive decisions on what farmers use on their farms based on, hey, you're allowed to use, glyphosate or atrazine or you name the chemistry. But he is able to say, if you want to sell cereal in the United States, we have these parameters. And what I think could happen, we're already seeing it with things like artificial dyes, right? He's going to try and ban those and move that forward. It'd be much easier for him actually to take away the use of pesticide, not by trying to argue it through the EPA or the USDA, but instead saying, if you have parts per trillion of glyphosate in your Wheaties, you can't serve those in United States cereal. And
Mhm.
overnight, that'll make it so almost no one grows wheat above the Mason-Dixon line, because you need glyphosate in order to get it to dry down in time. And so that
Hmm.
could radically change the shape of our agriculture. Now, I'm not saying he's going to do that, but the potential for him to do that is there in a way that it never was before. There was nobody that was the head of the FDA that was going to come anywhere close to something like that. And I think it's a real possibility here.
Hmm. What about seed oils? His obsession with seed oils. Do you think that that could also have a bigger impact?
Well, see, the seed oils thing is very interesting and actually very pro corn and very pro beef in the United States, because if you start increasing beef tallow, you got to really increase the amount of beef that you have. And right now, there are just not enough heifers out in the on the plains dropping enough calves to be able to keep up with what this demand could look like. If you start saying you're not allowed to use seed oil to make certain products, or they just do a public pressure thing that's going on, we're going to find out that you cannot make um, animal fats anywhere near as quickly as you can make seed oils. And that will definitely increase radically the demand for grain, because you're going to have so many more cattle being fed out as quickly as you can. And it'll increase the price of beef. But what that means, will we be growing canola? Will we be growing as much soy? I don't know, maybe not. So it could definitely have wild waves there. But it seems to me that Trump doesn't want waves in the agricultural system. It seems like he is steady as she goes. But that means not making changes for the small farmer. It just means keep doing more of what we've been doing and not change too much, is my read on it. You?
I mean, maybe I think he's smarter than this because I sort of agree with you at the domestic level, but the things he's doing with tariffs and with US foreign policy in general are going to create huge waves. I mean, it feels like years ago now, but that weird diplomatic spat with Colombia about illegal migration and sending those illegal migrants back to Colombia. Like, okay, like that's a hot button issue for lots of folks who are conservative, and he was obviously trying to respond to the base there. But he did that by picking on one of the biggest importers of cornmeal, one of the biggest growth markets for U.S. agriculture in general. And Colombia has already sort of batted its eyelashes at China since then and looking for alternatives. Like even though they tried to placate Trump at the beginning so that they avoided those tariffs. Like you might have just killed Colombia as a growth market for U.S. dairy farmers, or for U.S. nut growers, or for cornmeal exporters, or for soybean meal exporters. If we're going to do all these renewable diesel things, and so you add in Mexico and Canada and now the European Union. Not only are you making relations with the EU bad. You've been so aggressive with the EU that you're now creating the European farmer maybe as a competitor once again. Like they were dead in the water with the way things were going. And now you've woken Germany up and you've got the EU thinking that like food security is a threat again. Like you put all those foreign policy things together, it seems to me like all he wants to do is make waves. So I don't know. I don't know how to square his desires there.
Yeah, I mean, this should be what everybody is talking about, because the waves that could be created, to your point, whether you're messing around with people that want to import our goods, or if they really do carry out the illegal immigrants in the way that they are claiming that they're going to, you're not going to be
Mhm.
able to run U.S. dairies in the way that you are. There is not a large scale dairy in the United States that is not using illegal immigrants, and this upsets people in the dairy industry, but the head of the dairy industry in Idaho basically came out and said it. Hey, we can't do this without illegal immigrants. And I think there is public pressure for people to say, well, you better start doing it. But that's going to either shut down those dairies, or it is going to radically increase the price of a staple like milk. And what does that do domestically, right? If Trump is dealing with $9 a gallon milk, how much support is he going to get in the midterm elections? I don't know. But the only way that they get to carry out the illegal immigration policy that they're talking about is if they're getting rid of the illegal immigrants that are in the dairy industry, in the fruit industry, in the nut industry, and basically the entire system.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm of things too, because the answer to that problem, aside, the easiest answer would be immigration law reform. But a majority of Americans have wanted immigration law reform since the 1980s, and neither party has been able to give them that. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, the unicorn is coming. So the second easiest way to do it would be automation and use technology and AI and robots and things like that to try and augment things. The problem with that is in the same way that farmers are sort of down in the dumps, ag tech is down in the dumps. Interest rates are up. Nobody wants to invest in fancy ag tech right now, even though there are potential things out there talking about automation. And if you're not putting your foot forward there, then you really just do need, like you said, like the low wage worker who's not coming. And it's not like manufacturing. It's not like manufacturing where you can go to a town in Mexico and make something cheaply and you can deal with the tariffs. If you've literally gotten rid of the humans who are supposed to be at the dairy or supposed to be on the farm, like there's no real way to get around that. So yeah, just another example of maybe he doesn't want to make waves, but the things that he's doing are going to make waves. And it goes back to, so does he know that? Or is he just really so oblivious? Or is he so like instinctual? Like he just does things because that's what he feels in the moment, not realizing that he's shooting himself in the foot, whether it comes for the midterms or long-term support. And I don't know how long, you mentioned $9 a gallon milk. With eggs, he has successfully, it seems, pawned off the blame on that to Joe Biden. But if it keeps going, or if you get some other huge increase, I don't know who you pawn that off onto. Does that move continue to work going forward? I would think not, but he's also a master of blaming people for things and not
Well,
accepting
and
responsibility.
really, you look at the egg prices thing. Imagine you're the American farmer. You've had egg prices be low because there's huge amounts of production. Finally, the first time in your lifetime, you're watching $9 eggs because chickens are getting wiped out from avian flu. Maybe the government is killing too many birds. Maybe they're not. But you finally, if you're not a contract, futures contracted out, but you're finally making money on eggs, and they're like, hey, the prices are too high. We're going to start importing from South Korea. What does that tell
Mhm.
the American farmer? That tells the American farmer, we're only going to let you make so much money. And even though we're not supply managed, if the price goes up too high, we're going to go look to other markets and we're going to import those eggs because we want the votes more than we want your success. And so there are, egg farmers out there. I got to talk to them on my tour this year, where they're saying I was making a huge increase in capital in trying to get my egg laying barns out there. And
Mhm.
you're going to tell me that you're going to start undercutting the price. What does this tell me about how big I should get, how much I should put capital investment? So I don't view this as 4D chess. I also view it as, who could possibly understand all this? It's so complicated, that you've got to have people that you trust and are able to look at very complicated, nuanced relationships. And really, the only way you can do it, I believe, is free markets. If you're trying to monkey around with these markets too much, you're going to break something, and you're going to have, weird bubbles and crazy crashes and all of the things that come with a centralized, managed agricultural system.
Yeah, I thought one of Biden's biggest tactical mistakes, and I didn't understand it at the time, and I still don't understand it, was the extent to which he was obsessed with gasoline prices, and the way that he tried to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to manipulate the price of gasoline, and constantly talking about it and talking about how the administration needed to respond to that. And I almost felt like it was a build it and they will come sort of thing. Like if you would just stop talking about it, maybe people wouldn't focus on it so much. And at least your messaging should be, look, I can't control this. Like, yes, I'm the leader of the most powerful country in the world, but I can't control gasoline prices. Like, what am I supposed to do besides things that are going to damage the economy? I feel like it's the same way with Trump and eggs or some of these other things that we're going to talk about. Because if he's saying to Congress at the State of the Union, you have to sell more to the domestic market, the second half of that conversation, to your point, can't be we're going to import eggs from South Korea. It has to be, hey, the Constitution does not say that you are entitled to life, liberty, and cheap eggs. Like maybe the US consumer is going to have to pay more for eggs. And maybe my government will support the consumer so that they can buy from the farmer, so that the farmer can actually make a living while I go and tariff the crap out of all of these enemies who, whether rightly or wrongly, I think that we need to sort of reset relations with. But you get the protectionism, but you're not getting that fiscal support for whether it's the consumer or all these others. And it's just going to fall to industry or the farmer themselves to bear the brunt of that cost. And then where does it go? So it just seems like a disaster waiting to happen, honestly. I feel like the thing we learned the most with inflation was, yes, the American consumer will whine and complain, but they've gotten used to incredibly cheap food. Like the American consumer can afford to pay more. And most American consumers, the ones that can afford it, who have disposable income, if you tell them, hey, this is better for you, or this was grown local, they will probably spend more money and be proud to spend more money on it. But we're not doing that kind of messaging.
There certainly is a push right now for people to be selling directly to consumers. And I was talking with a guy the other day that said, the weak link right here is the cost of delivery from the farmer to the consumer.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this is where, and it shocked me. He was like, this is where automation of delivery becomes a very powerful force for connecting farmers directly to consumers. Because right now you need so many logisticians that can manage what's going where, and then you need drivers that can put it there. But as you start to get more automated trucks, as you start having delivery, then there could be a way out of the kind of weird logical system that we have going right now. And I thought, that's a very interesting part of automation I hadn't heard of. There's a ton of downsides to automation when you're talking about getting rid of people on those farms. But delivery would be one of those things where people could start buying way more directly and not needing such a complex food system.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it quite that way. I knew that infrastructure was one of the problems because U.S. infrastructure is literally built to optimize exporting. It is not built to optimize going to a local domestic market. So it's actually probably easier to export something to Japan, depending on where you are, than it would be to get it to Iowa or to Illinois in some part of the country, because that's just not the way it goes. But to your point, if you can have drones or automated trucking and you can get away from some of the, choke points there, maybe that works. It actually sort of it's almost analogous to the way that people are putting solar on their houses because the grid has become so dilapidated and there's no prospects for it to continue, that people are saying, I think I'd rather have a solar backup if I can get it. And hey, I can get a 25 or 27%, refund check on my taxes from the government. Why not? That sounds like maybe good math for me there. Um, Anything else you want to hit on politics before I start picking your brain about Bitcoin and how maybe Bitcoin is the answer to some of the things that we're talking about here?
Well, that is my favorite thing. I think one last thing I would look out for in this space is, will the USDA have some of its power over processing taken back from it? That's the one area where I think a lot of farmers would really appreciate that. I think it also would help consumers. When you first look at it, you're like, no, no, we want the USDA, we want them to help make sure our food is okay. But really, the USDA has really centralized control over all of the packing, whether it's beef, chicken, eggs. There's so much control there that I think that may be an area where Trump gets to um, clear out some of the more antiquated system. But we'll see. I don't know.
It's funny as you're saying that. This is a really niche thing I'm about to say. Probably a very small subset of my listeners will even know what I'm talking about. Um, I come from a Jewish background. In order to make sure that your house is certified kosher according to the laws of the Old Testament and the Talmud and everything else, there's literally a kashrut commission that comes and koshers your house, and you pay the kashrut commission to say, "Oh, we've done," and they come with blow torches and everything else, and they do all the stuff that there says nothing in the Bible that you need a blowtorch in order to kosher a house, but they will be there with the blow torches and they will charge you for it, etc. And it's a nice little cash cow that they get for them. So it's funny that this processing monopoly thing happens at all different stages of the food economy, right down to your koshering of your home. So anyway, really niche.
That's a great analogy, and it really is. And I think everybody in the system knows the inspector there is really doing something more akin to blessing than he is to actually ensuring safety. So I think it's a good analogy.
Blessing by blowtorch. That might even just be the title of the podcast right there. Okay, well, so talk to me about Bitcoin. I was a Bitcoin skeptic at first. I've come around a lot recently just based on where I see inflation going and the US dollar and things like that. But when we first met in what was that, Wisconsin, 2 months ago? Wow, that feels like a long time ago now. This was one of the things that you really blew my mind with the most, the way that Bitcoin in particular could actually play a big role for farmers in general, and how farmers and US ag in general should be thinking about specifically Bitcoin as an opportunity. So I'm just going to give you that nice juicy softball and let you cook.
Well, so I have loved Bitcoin for more than 10 years. I found it, and as an ideological thing, I thought it was really interesting. And when I would bring it up with ag, right, these are people that are very doubting. It's like combining, the things that they hate the most, computers and like cybersecurity or cryptography. So none of this makes sense to them. But in the last few, I would say 6 months, I would say there has been a massive increase in the ag space, in interest in Bitcoin. And I think one of the ways that farmers have started to understand it is you say, look, why is it that land prices are going up? Well, there's a finite amount of farm ground, and people know that. So if you have dollars, the value of those dollars is going down because they're just going to print more of them. So you want to put that money into something that you can't print more of, which is land. And Bitcoin is the only other analogous thing to land, that you can't go print more of them. There will only ever be 21 million of them. And then you start thinking like, well, how would this play out with farmers? There are a lot of people right now that are saying, if I want to get into farming, I can't just buy a couple of acres and build my way into it. That is not the way
Mm-hmm.
this works. You need to have, the benefits of scale. But you can start saying, I'm going to own digital property. I'm going to own something finite, and someday use that as my way to buy into land. And at first, this was scoffed at and laughed at. But now, as more and more farmers have started to look at it, they've started to say, wait, there's a lot of ideological similarities between me and Bitcoin that I think they're now starting to come around to. So I now know dozens, if not hundreds, of farmers that have started buying Bitcoin. And I think that it's starting to impact the way that they think about what the future could be like in a world where you don't have only fiat printed currencies.
It's funny. I was out to dinner. Shout out to Matt if he's listening to the podcast. You know who you are. Went out to dinner with Matt and his family at an event that I did in Florida, I guess 6 weeks ago now. And I think he wanted me to tell his sort of about to go into college son that investing in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin was a bad idea. And so we got to this restaurant and he was like, tell him your crazy idea about Bitcoin. And I was like, man, I think that's actually a pretty good idea. I think you might want to help him along here. I'm not going to be able to shout him down. What do you think though about like, because as I was doing a little bit of prep on this, like, do you see folks that are also like incorporating mining into their own operations? Like I've seen, some examples of really sort of out there farmers who are they're creating Bitcoin mining operations on their farm. They're using the heat that is generated from the mining operation to like warm up a greenhouse that is now some specialty crop or vegetable that maybe they wouldn't have before, and now they've got a whole, like, is that too far beyond the pale, or do you see that sort of thing happening too?
I think this scale of heating up greenhouses is probably not large enough to make an actual dent because the system is so huge. But I will say that there's a lot of farmers that have stranded energy on their fields, right? Where they have maybe an oil pump in Oklahoma or in Texas or in different parts where it's no longer valuable for a truck to come and collect all that natural gas or to build a pipeline out to it. And so now farmers are figuring out, wait a second, I can hire a generator. It comes in on the back of a semi. You drop it off right here. And not only can you burn that natural gas right there and turn it into electricity using a generator, but now you can hook that up to a Bitcoin mine. And it's essentially, it's not free because you have the capital investment. But once you've covered that capital investment, you are getting a chance to mine your own Bitcoin. And I had been talking about this for a long time. And then I kind of gave up on it. But then not long ago, I had a friend be like, hey, man, let me show you all the places that are doing this. And it was throughout Oklahoma, northern Texas.
Mm.
There are definitely people that have energy co ops in places like northern Iowa, all across Nebraska, where they're able to get, electricity at 11 cents a kilowatt hour, 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And at those prices, you're able to make mining profitable. And so whether or not it's directly tied to their farm, it's the fact that in the farming communities, they have access to things that people in other environments just don't have.
Yeah. Is that hard? Is the setup hard? Like, would it be like prohibitive for an older farmer to sort of do this technology, or do you think it's something that is more intimidating than it should be based on the ease of it?
Well, not anymore. And one of the greatest companies that was doing this was run by a guy named, or is run by a guy named Steve Barber. And I'm trying to think of the name. He calls them hash huts. And he was making them in Canada. And you used to have to pay a bundle to be able to get them down to the United States. Well, he was so frustrated with Canada's approach to Bitcoin that he moved his operations down to Montana. And now they build these things and they send salesmen out to say, where is there the most stranded natural gas? Where are the oil derricks that are no longer being used?
Mm.
And so it's essentially they drop a container off and that container hosts the generator and the miners. And I think what they end up doing is making an agreement. We will come out and service this thing. We'll make sure that it's hooked up and we'll split the profits from the mining and it's still profitable. I think they are trying to build more and more capacity because there's so much demand for it at this point.
Interesting. And it's specifically Bitcoin that you're bullish on, right? Like, it's not the other cryptocurrencies that you would advise the farmer to go for.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is the only one that is truly decentralized, meaning that there is nobody that controls it. And it is the only one that is finite. There are other cryptos out there that you might hear about Ethereum, Ripple, Solana, all kinds of these things where at the end of the day, there is a core team of people that decide, should we allow this transaction to go through? Oh, something bad happened. Should we reverse that transaction? Oh, we, before we release this out to the public, issued a bunch of these coins to ourselves. And so we did what's called a pre-mine. With Bitcoin, there was none of that. There is no centrally guided group of people and so that control Bitcoin. And so it has qualities about it that cannot be replicated any other way than to have a system that's built. So Bitcoin is the one, and I would put that up against anybody. There's always somebody coming along being like, "Yeah, but what about this, crazy shit coin?" And every single time there's some major flaw to it that benefits the person that issued it and harms the person that's trying to hold on to it.
We had a futurist on the podcast, I guess over a year now, Gary Golden. He's a good friend, who came on and did this for Cardano exactly, and he was very convincing for like a month or two. I was like, "Ooh, Cardano, this is this thing," but it's also the way I approach some of these conversations, because when I was still a novice, and I wouldn't call myself an expert at all with crypto at all, but when I was still very much a novice and I would get questions about cryptocurrency, I wouldn't do what Peter Zeihan does, which says, "Oh, it's going to zero, it's a fraud." What I would say is I would elegantly dance around it and say, well, blockchain technology is really interesting, and as a technology for traceability of crops or for medical records, it's really interesting. And if you want exposure to I could, I'm embarrassed going back and listening to some takes I had 2 or 3 years ago, but at least I would like deflect rather than sort of going all in. But the question I'm leading up to for you here is there any value to that? Is there any value for blockchain for the U.S. farmer, whether it's life cycle of crops or about carbon intensity or things like that? Or do you think that's really just something that people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about would say when they were asked a Bitcoin question?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty passionately about this, and I don't know if you saw the Twitter fight I got on with quite a
I
few
didn't.
people just the other day. But there was a farmer that I respect and like that went out and said, "Hey, we're thinking about putting our cattle on this blockchain," and we learned about blockchain. And I wrote what I thought was somewhat innocuous and said, there is only one value to a blockchain, and that is if it is decentralized and that no one can make edits to it. That the way that the Bitcoin blockchain is set up is valuable because you have not only all these miners, but you have all these nodes, and this allows you to know where all the Bitcoin are, that it's all being tracked, that you can't double spend, that you can't duplicate that. Everybody else that's selling blockchain to do tracking, it is a shitcoin. They're lying to you. What you really need is a database. And there's virtually no value to creating these as a blockchain because a database can do many, many orders of magnitude more things than a blockchain. A blockchain does one thing, it does it very, very well. And the only place that it's applicable is with Bitcoin. So when IBM and Walmart are trying to roll this thing out saying, we're going to do all of our tracking on blockchain, there's no way you could convince me. I mean, well, you could convince me, but right now I am completely unconvinced that there's any benefit to having a blockchain as opposed to just having a sophisticated database. And that database, the reason they're calling it a blockchain is because they're trying to leverage off of the value that people get from Bitcoin. And there's no end to the number of people that are coming along being like, our blockchain is going to revolutionize stuff. And really, there's very, very little value there.
Yeah, I think, or at least one example of value has been you can get like maybe an Emirati prince or a Saudi prince to pay a lot of money if you say, "Oh, the cow is on the blockchain," and we've sort of like they'll like that because they'll like, to you say you're sort of getting some of that Bitcoin dust on you just by calling out the words. So I'm learning, listeners. I'm learning as we go along. I asked
Well,
this to all the
to your
big.
point about the learning, every single person that is thinking should resist Bitcoin. And what you should do is play with it, and then you'll be like, yeah, but what about this? And then you're going to go stumble, and you're going to find out, oh, there's actually a really elegant answer to it. And then you're going to be like, yeah, 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 but what about this? And you find out that every single question, every single problem you bring up actually has an elegant answer. So resisting Bitcoin is not the not a bad thing inherently. It's the resisting it and then being like, well, I'm just not going to go follow up on that. That's when you
Mhm.
become a Luddite or somebody that's not able to keep up with it.
Well, that's a perfect segue to the last question on this topic I wanted to ask you, which is there, if you're wrong about this, is there any threat to Bitcoin? Is there anything that makes you think like this is the question that I don't have the elegant answer to yet? Anything that keeps you up at night about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the typical answers that people have are either regulation or quantum computing or AI being able to break these things. And I think when you go look at the math, and I have to just trust people at some point, I go look at what they're saying about this and what somebody else is saying. Those are not things that frighten me. I think probably the biggest vulnerability to Bitcoin is ultimately that we know where every single Bitcoin is. So it is actually not an anonymous thing at all. It is perfectly, exactly where all the money is in each of the wallets. And what could happen is the government could get involved with this in a big way, and they can't control it no matter how much Bitcoin they own. And there's no chance that they're going to catch up with mining. So they're not going to be able to change the code. But what they could do that's kind of scary to Bitcoin, I don't have an elegant answer to this, is they could say, these are all the Bitcoin addresses that are greenlit, And these are all the addresses that are red light. And if you accept payment from these addresses, which we think are from people that haven't declared that they own this wallet or that they have these Bitcoin, that could create a framework in which the government is not actually controlling Bitcoin, but by virtue of extension, saying which ones you can use and which ones you can't. It will create weird blockchains, because what'll end up happening is you'll have forks where you'll say these are the ones where these are the people
Mhm.
that care about that black, green, and red list, and these are the people that don't care about it. So that's a threat that I don't have a good answer to, and I'd actually be really open if any of your listeners have a way around that. But I do think that that is a threat, not an existential threat, but one that needs to be addressed going forward.
How did you feel? How do you feel about the Trump administration's embrace, not just of Bitcoin, but of all cryptocurrencies? Is it the type of thing that you were optimistic about at first, but then you saw they were embracing them all, and now you're a little bit disillusioned, or do you think that they're waking up to something there?
Well, so one thing I will say for them is that the Trump administration has said Bitcoin is different than all these others, and they have talked about doing a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I'm ambivalent about whether or not I want governments to be spending money on Bitcoin. I think it's probably good that they don't sell their Bitcoin, and I like some of that language in there. But at the end of the day, like, I am very suspicious of any government, and I think that it doesn't really matter, particularly if they do it all through executive action. Whatever can be done that way can be undone that way. So the only way that I think
Mhm.
that this is a strong pillar to be built on, where you can expect, hey, this is going to impact Bitcoin over 10, 20, 50 years, is if they go through and they legislate it, and they do it through, pass a bill through the House, through the Senate, get it signed. And that's probably further off than whatever they're talking about right now about executive orders.
I can't remember if this was in the first Trump administration or if it was in the Biden administration, where there was some congressional hearing and somebody was presenting evidence, and one of the senators or the Congress women was like, "You say this is on a Substack. What is a Substack? I don't understand this concept of Substack." To which I say, like, if Congress can't even get Substacks, I doubt we're getting legislation on cryptocurrency or Bitcoin anytime soon.
I think
Um,
the legislation
Van,
is going to come from the state level, and that's what's going to motivate the
yeah.
federal level. I think if we see Arizona or Oklahoma or Michigan, any of these states finally get it all the way passed through their houses and get it signed, and they start using state dollars to purchase it, all of a sudden the federal government is going to say, oh, wait a second, we don't want to be buying after these other states have started using state money. And I think just yesterday, GameStop came out and said they're going to put a huge position of their cash, which I think is over $4 billion, into Bitcoin. So it is
Hmm.
moving more in that direction. I think things will happen. Um, the time scale is hard to know.
Always. With the last 10 or 12 minutes that we have, Vance, I, I'm jealous of your job. You get to talk to people who have lived interesting and meaningful lives and help them record their stories and transmit that meaning down. So, I mean, it's a bit of a trite question, but what are some of the favorite things that you've learned from interviewing the hundreds of people that you've talked to in the space that really opened your mind and that you want to share with our listeners?
The thing that happens when you interview people, hundreds of them, right? You do one full day interview, and then you do another one a couple days later, and then you do that for weeks, and then you do it for months, is that you start to observe patterns that you don't see in normal everyday media, right? So we often get the feeling of, like, what does culture think by what we see on TV or what we hear people talking about in, the media in general. But when people are talking with me, by the time we're done with a 2 hour interview or a full day interview, which ends up being 6 hours, they end up telling you about things that matter very deeply to them. And a lot of those things are not necessarily countercultural, but they're not captured in our media. They're not captured in the way that, you might normally think. So, I have to say, like, my personal belief set, the way that I am oriented towards, is atheism, for example. But I have heard so many families that are successful, that have children that love and adore their parents so much that they want to get them a legacy interview. They fly them to St. Louis. That you have to stop and say, whoa, 90%, 95% of these people are talking about their faith and what matters and what their children should know about God. That I ended up changing aspects of my life and started changing the way that I was raising my children, because I just couldn't ignore how many people were saying, you've got to have a prayer life. You've got to be able to talk to your creator. If there's one thing I want to communicate to my children, the most important thing is to have a relationship with God and to be a good spouse. Well, now all of a sudden you start getting in a disagreement with your wife and you start thinking, hey, what is the advice I've heard? And so for me, I have gotten the wisdom of people. And it's things that if I were in an ordinary conversation, you and I are sitting in a bar, I might want to have a theological argument with you. I might want to push back and have mine, but I'm there just to hear their story. And after hearing so many, it's actually changed me, the way I'm in my marriage and the way that I'm raising my children. I think that's a rather profound experience to have had.
Well, I'm gonna take the mic from the listeners here, so I mean, I also sort of go in that atheist direction more so than any other sort of direction at this point, and I'm raising young children. So, what are the ways that you've changed based on what you've learned and educate? Because I assume you haven't drifted too far from the atheist predilection, but you also have these things that you've learned. So, how have you changed how you're raising your kids based on that?
The first one is I started to realize, and I don't know that I would have observed it, but I started to realize that my children who go to a wonderful Montessori school were coming home and they were singing what are the equivalent of, atheist prayers. Thank you, Mother Earth. Thank you, Father God. Thank you for this day. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I realized that was my school's imprint there. And I started thinking about, like, is that the right path, right? Is that actually what I want them to know? And I started to realize, like, what shapes my belief system? What were the values that make it so I can be talking with these people? And to be totally candid, I have Catholic people, I have Protestants, I have had Jewish participants. So I'm not saying any one thing, but I started to realize one of the biggest and most important things you can do in raising your children is telling them stories. I'm hearing the stories of families being passed down, and I'm also recognizing that so much of what our religious faith is stories. So now every night before my kids go to bed, we talk about we do two things. We do a Bible story, and then we do a family story. And we're trying to keep that up and trying to say, this is the most important thing that I have to offer you, is going to be way more valuable than your assets. It's going to be way more valuable than what school I put you in. It's going to be, what stories can you look on when you encounter a problem, and that those stories can help you find the right solution. And I think that it's more than just my family stories, it's the stories of the culture that I came from. So trying to tell Bible stories, trying to tell family stories is something I don't think I would have done had I not done legacy interviews.
It's so interesting. Half of my dad's parents were Holocaust survivors, and so Judaism was really important to my dad that Judaism was transmitted to me and my sister, to the extent that they sent us to private Jewish day school. And in some ways, I got really frustrated with Judaism as I got into my 20s and 30s because it felt so insular. The laws, it felt like, were limiting me to be in community with people who were only like me and preventing me from being in community with other people. Like we were joking about keeping kosher earlier. Like the actual functional impact of keeping kosher is you can't eat with people who don't keep kosher. So how are you supposed to eat with a Catholic or a Protestant at their house if they haven't done exactly every single time? And that like really bothered me. And it also, like, it's something that I feel that I have to pass on because, if you're the grandson of Holocaust survivors, you have this story of trauma like within your own like lifetime, and you touched people who had this trauma. And so you're always sort of scared, always sort of like, like, is this society going to treat me well? Is it going to do good things to me? Like, do my children need to be ready just in case like things turn against them? So there's this like weird trauma mechanism. And in some ways I've tried to correct it by, um, the school that we're sending my daughters to. The thing I love about it actually is that they do all the religions. So like we come home one day and it's Chinese Lunar New Year stuff. Like she caught the snake in the parade, and then the next day it's like, oh, and now we're doing like it's Jewish high holidays. And then the next day it's Easter, and it's like she's getting like this real exposure to lots of different things. But I take your point. Like if you're leaving a vacuum there for who communicates what our relationship is with the universe, if you don't actually sort of imprint something there yourself, you are leaving it up to them, I guess, to go out there. And maybe that's not a role for a parent. I don't know. I'm going to have to sit with that for a while and think about that.
Well, I've already seen in my own 4-year-old about how it shapes her decisions. And that's something that's been very powerful to me. So I'm absorbing all these stories, I'm helping people record them to pass them down, and then I'm watching my own daughter be like, "Remember, Dad, when you said this? Remember that your dad did this thing, or remember when you said that in the Bible it has this story?" And you start realizing, like, I've said this on a stage many, many times before. Like, the human mind doesn't actually know that many facts. It's the story you tell yourself about facts that is actually what matters. And the value of what you pass down as a parent is to take this chaotic world and say, let me tell you a story that helps you understand it. And I realized just how deeply important it is to be communicating some story, because that vacuum is 100% going to be filled by somebody's stories. It's going to be the Disney stories or the Blues Clues stories or the school stories. And so, as my role as a
TikTok.
parent, it's to figure out how to curate the right stories.
Yeah. Well, that blew my mind. I hope it blows the listeners' minds as well.
It's not.
Vance,
This is a little bit off the beaten path of your normal podcast.
I try not to have a normal podcast. Like people, like I started this podcast mostly to record conversations I was having, and I thought, hey, I'll like share them with people because like they might be interesting for them. I've always hated not hated, like geopolitics is the reason I have a successful career, but sometimes it feels like a straitjacket. And I'm not only obsessed with geopolitics, like it's actually a small part of the things that actually animate me. I think that's one of the things that make me a good analyst, because it's not the only thing that I'm interested in. People sort of ask me sometimes how to get into my career and like what path, like what choices I made. It's like, I didn't choose this as a career. I don't have a degree from Johns Hopkins in international affairs. If you do, there's like thousands of you. Nobody cares. It's about the ability, to your point, like the analysis in all of its forms, whether it's geopolitical or financial or like interpersonal. It's all about, to your point, okay, here's the facts, and then how do I give this meaning, and how do I let the person understand what's actually going on here, and how do I give them the tools to respond when President Trump announced tariffs against my biggest trading partner, or I get this thing happening, this larger trend towards, health inside of the US, and I've got this RFK. Like, you need to be able to transmit something so that people can understand that rather than just the facts. So it actually feels completely on the track for me, even if it is off the beaten track of geopolitics. But, I've never been able to square that marketing circle.
Well, I think what I really like about the way you do geopolitics or geostrategy is that it's very easy for the people that are insulated in this community. And I come from that world. My graduate degree is in international relations and cross cultural negotiations. Is a lot of those people turn into comic book guy, where they're like,
Yes.
you're on The Simpsons, like, oh, your analysis just doesn't include X or Y or Z, and making it very complicated. And your approach, and I've seen you on the stage and I've listened to your podcast, is to make it so, like, hey, I'm going to bring some heft to this conversation, but it's still going to be a conversation where the things that you know about aren't necessarily put in their language of IR, but you're gonna this is going to be accessible, and you're going to be able to add to it too. And I think that's what makes you unique and rare. And you do it without going to the other extreme, which is, I think, Peter Zeihan's thing of anthropomorphizing everything, turning everything into a story that's so simplified that there's very little meaning there, although you can kind of feel it. So you stretch that and find that golden mean, as it were, to figure out how to communicate complicated ideas, but in a way that people can absorb them.
I appreciate you saying that, and listeners, I didn't have to pay him to say that at all. But what one of the problems with people like Peter or like George Friedman, who trained me, and it took me years to learn this, it's that people don't actually want predictions or answers. Those are actually relatively unhelpful. They want you to help them think differently. They want you to help them get their minds around what's going on in the world. And so this shift happened for me, honestly, about 10 years into my career, where I started caring less about whether I got things exactly right, and I cared more about, did I anticipate something that nobody else was talking about? Did I talk about all of the possibilities? And did I include even the thing I didn't think was going to happen in the possibilities? And then also, was I the first one to raise my hand when I was wrong? Because that's also a teaching thing. Like, if I can say, hey, I was wrong about this thing, I was wrong for this reason, let's go to this like scenario tree because like this thing was wrong. And I think one of the things that people like your Peters and your Georges get wrong is they're stuck in this mentality of, I have to get it correct. And I sympathize with that. I want to get everything correct too. It like keeps me up at night when I screw things up. But if you use that as the straitjacket, then you're like, constantly looking at information and trying to fit it into a preconceived narrative that you have, rather than just reacting to the things that are in front of you. And I think that's as true in life as it is in analysis. Like, we're talking about stories and meanings that people pass on to generations, like probably for future generations that you're talking to. You don't want the stories to be straitjackets, right? You want them to be things that they can iterate on, that they can learn from. The last thing you want is that to be like sort of what my grandparents passed on to me, was like, no, you must be afraid of the world. You must think this thing because this thing happened to me and it's the way forward. So finding that golden mean in all areas of your life, I think, is super important.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's the hardest thing is to be able to look at your life and find out where was I wrong. But this is what I tell people right before we start a legacy interview, right? The stories that are the easiest to tell are when you woke up and you made the right decision and you did all the right things and things went well. But those stories actually have no value and won't be retold because those
Hmm.
are effectively bragging. The stories that get retold are when you fell down. It's when you messed up. It's when something didn't go right, and the lesson, the wisdom, the thing that you are actually hewing out of this very difficult experience we call life is when you failed or when you fell down, what did you do to pick yourself back up? Because that's the thing that holds all of the value. And it comes out just in little tiny drips that your family then in the future, when they fall down, they can say, ah, granddad did this, and that's how we overcame it. But that's hard to do, and it requires killing your ego in order to create that little tiny drip of wisdom, which is so hard to earn.
Vance, I had high expectations for this podcast, but we exceeded them. I'm looking forward to having you back on again soon, man.
It's been a pleasure, man. I appreciate it.